So, hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming out. So, this talk is basically me trying to take my experiences playing, spending too much time playing too many board games, and figure out some takeaways and lessons and patterns I've seen, both in what doesn't work in keeping players engaged, but also in how well-designed board games keep people engaged, like noticing what it is that makes the compelling games more compelling. So, just first of all, at a high level, why use board games to study engagement? Like, what's the what is the so we're going to talk about why common pitfalls that I've noticed in various game sessions, engagement strategies that come from good design, and then finally, this will be kind of a quick section, taking those lessons and thinking about them a little bit more meta as far as general design of user experiences or other interactive experiences. So, hey, I'm Voss. I work in software. I'm basically a technical person who's gotten much more into like product, defining products, helping businesses build stuff. An interesting caveat is that I am not an academic when it comes to board games. I have not really studied the literature, the official books, etc. But it overlaps certainly with what people have studied. But this is really kind of an informal thing coming out of my experiences. I am obsessed. I own a lot of games. I go to a lot of conferences to play games. And that's kind of what's powering this. So what do I mean when I say a board game? And, a lot of times when you tell people you're into board games, they're like, board games? You mean like Monopoly? Yes. So my definition here of a board game is a structured social experience that's based on fixed rules, centered around physical components on a flat surface, such as game board, game pieces, cards, dice, and generally speaking, designed to facilitate fun and engagement. And so our sort of definition of success for board games is to engage players in some kind of social activity that promotes having fun. And there are board games, by the way, whose goal is not having fun. It's a subset. They're called serious games. That's actually their formal title. And they exist. But for the purposes of today, the purpose of board games that we care about are the ones that promote having fun. And to me, the easiest way to sort of define this is more of an external definition, which is, are players engaged during most of the activity? Are they paying attention? Are they too busy looking at their phones or walking away? Do they finish the game? Do they want to play it again? And extra credit is when people are genuinely excited and they kind of want to buy the game, show it to their friends and family, like, okay, they had a great time because they want to repeat this experience. That's a good sign. So as far as engagement, why do you study board games? Well, there's a lot of things about board games that make them a great way to kind of think about engagement and studying engagement. First of all, they have a fixed set of artificial rules, so it's sort of a simplified environment. And if you want to experiment, you can change those rules and see what happens. They're social, so on top of any mechanical rules, you've got the human interaction, the human emotions, interactions between players, all those dynamics. They touch emotional, they touch intellectual, mechanical things, social things. And lastly, if you're thinking about interactive experiences or interactive products, things like that, board games are only successful, what we're calling board games, if they're fun. And that's a really high standard, right? They're not getting your taxes done. They're not paying your bills. You're there to enjoy the time playing them. So if they don't make that high standard, then they don't succeed. So that makes them a very pure attempt to engage people. There's no other reason for their existence. They're really here to create fun. So the first part of this is really just talking about what are the needs to stay engaged. And I'm kind of going through some counterexamples that I've experienced when you think about, okay, why that didn't feel like a fun session? What was the problem? Why did this go well? It's a little bit of a bottom-up approach. It maybe feels a little bit negative, but you'll see that we'll be talking about a lot of well-designed games. So, and just a little caveat, you might say that there are no bad games, only bad gaming experiences, by which I mean even games that I mentioned as examples where there's a problem with engagement, it doesn't mean that game cannot create fun for other players. In other words, games are not objectively good or bad. There are definitely games that are a little better designed than others, but a lot of it is about suitability for audience. Is this appropriate to the people at hand, et cetera? And as an example of that, there's a game called Candyland that a lot of people grew up with, where there are literally no decisions. You are not deciding anything when you play a game of Candyland. It's a children's game where all you're doing is moving along a track inside a colorful world that's themed as candy, and you're just pulling cards off a deck, and just saying, okay, it's red, move my player to the red square. It's green, move my player to the green square. And yet, the amount of joy that this game has brought to children is countless. I mean, this is an all-time classic American board game, and in fact, it was invented by a teacher who was stuck in a hospital ward where people who had polio were being kept to get better. And it was invented to entertain lonely, young, sick kids who are away from home. So spectacularly successful game. For most audiences, a horrible game. 0 decisions, totally random, not interesting at all. So, a game that's quote unquote bad in some ways could be phenomenal in others. So pitfall number 1 is that the decisions of the game are too obvious, right? We're here to do something to get engaged. And there are certain games where the mechanics of the game, basically the game just plays itself. So I'm not really deciding anything. Candyland was an example I just gave. Another example is the game of War. It's a traditional game you play with a deck of cards. You each just get half the deck and you just play the next card, And if your number is higher than your opponent's number, you win. If they win, and you're just trying to get all the cards. So, so you have to have some kind of meaningful decisions typically. And even when there are decisions, it's important that it feels like they matter. And there are some games where when you play them, even though you've made a whole bunch of decisions at the end, you're like, it didn't really seem to matter what I did. No matter what I did, our scores were similar, or I won or lost, not because of what I did, just because of luck or how the things were worked out. And one of the things that compounds this problem is if there's not an interesting theme or motivation for what it is you're doing in the game. Not that all games have to be thematic. A second pitfall is, is that the inside the game, the sort of randomness feels like it overshadows decisions. And this is very much a subjective thing. But, there are a lot of scenarios where random effects, positive or negative, feel like they overshadow your decisions that you made. So it's like, I did all this stuff, but it didn't matter because I rolled the die and I lost anyway. Now, there's games where they really are capitalizing on the randomness and they're light enough and it's all mixed together and it's designed well. But there are other times when the randomness can kind of throw off the positive experience of a game. So why should I even struggle to win when it's just random anyway, right? The game is pretending to give me choices. My choices don't really matter. A third pitfall is, so an example of this, by the way, which is a weird example, is one of my favorite games. It's this massive, complicated game called Eclipse, where basically you're simulating a space war and you have planets and you're conquering things and you're doing all this stuff. You have all these pieces. The game can take 3 to 5 hours. And you have the giant space shuttles that you're designing your spaceships with weapons, and your weapons are to counteract the other guy's weapons. And there's aliens, space aliens, and it all ends in a battle in the middle. But one of the things this game does is you're all spread out across this galaxy, and it's an empty map. And as you explore, you're pulling tiles out of a deck of tiles, and that's going to tell you what is in that section of space. And you're slowly exploring and coming together and meeting in the middle. A lot of people have a problem with this game because those map tiles, for such a big, complicated game that takes so long, those map tiles are very consequential. One person may end up in a part of space that has wonderful planets for colonizing and lots of resources and no obstacles, and they get really strong and powerful, and then they meet the other players. And another person may have bad planets, or they're surrounded by really powerful aliens and they haven't built up any strength yet, and here I am wasting my 4 hours. So, how randomness interacts with the rest of the game matters a lot. There are some ways of working around this. People have come up with rules where you pull multiple tiles and pick one or whatever, but it's an interesting example where even in a complicated game, a bit of randomness can turn out to be a big handicap. Another problem with engagement in games is when people fall too far behind and the winner is obvious too early. So it's like, I'm in a 2-hour game, but 30 minutes in, I just know Sarah's going to win. Like, she's just way ahead. She's crushing me. I'm not emotionally invested. Like, why bother, right? And 2 classic games from my childhood where this can happen, the way the game is structured, are Risk and Monopoly. So in both of those games, you can have a runaway leader, and it's pretty obvious they're going to win. But if you follow the rules of the game, you're going to be sitting there another 30 to 60 or more minutes, just going through the motions of finishing the game. Another issue, which is almost a dynamic between the players, is that if you have a skilled player, a highly skilled player, and a less skilled player, again, you're just crushed too early. So unskilled players just don't have a chance. At which point, it's no fun for a certain person to play a game with a certain other person. There's just too much of a gap. So, sorry, just to fill in, we're starting with kind of a little bit of a quick fly through some of the examples of unengaging gaming sessions as a way of deriving kind of, so what is it that the good games are doing, the well-designed games are doing to kind of improve that? So a very, again, complicated example of a game where the skill level matters so much is a game called Food Chain Magnet, which doesn't look like much here, but it's fascinating and very rich. Basically, your 1950s food chain restaurant owners, and it's got a whole thing where you're hiring, managers and waiters, and you're deciding the menu, and you're doing marketing. So I'm a burger restaurant, but now I'm creating demand for pizza, and I'm going to start selling pizza. And then it's a very rich, complicated game. But because of the way it's structured, if you make certain wrong turns near the beginning of the game, you pretty much can lose in like the first turn. It's famous for that. So another example, another issue that people have is just straight up games being too hard to learn. And there's many examples. I'm giving an extreme example here of a game that people who like this game want to learn a hard game. So there's an old game called Magic Realm. The rulebook is 122 pages. It comes in a giant binder. And, there are certain people who just absolutely love a game that is all about learning a complicated system. Another game like that is a very classic game from 1979 called Advanced Squad Leader, which is a game that simulates combat, but to a very low level of detail. It's this troop, and the weather is that, and the terrain is this, and by the way, this person's tired, and oh no, they got sick, and they slipped on a stone and whatever. So these are actual components from the game. Oop. And you can see in here, there's literally spreadsheets that you look up to find out, like, oh, well, if I'm attacking you under these conditions, I'm going to roll this die, and if it's this number, I win, whatever. So, there are games that can be too complicated for people. Now, the context of that matters. A game can be too long for its weight. So again, a diagram of time versus weight strategy. I did not draw the diagram. But a frequent thing that I hear in my board game hobby is people saying, hey, what'd you think of that game? It was really fun, but it was 45 minutes too long. Like it lasted 2 hours. And for its level of complexity and my level of investment in it and the kind of game it was, it's like, oh, it was delicious as a hamburger, but when you made the hamburger the size of a pizza, man, I really didn't want to get through the end of that pizza. Like it was just too much. So that kind of balance matters. Some kinds of gameplay are good in a longer game. Others work better in a shorter format. So these are these kind of 10 things that we've gone through, and I want to use these to derive some needs that you need in order to be engaged in the game. So the first 3 things here: decisions are too obvious, decisions don't matter, there's too much randomness. Basically, to be engaged, we need to feel like we have meaningful decisions. I mean, there's some games that are intentionally very random, but in general, if you're making decisions, you want them to count. You want to feel like they mean something. A second sort of category is, in order to be engaged in a game, you need a certain amount of tension. You need to feel like, well, I can win, but I'm not definitely going to win. I could lose, I could win. Without that, you kind of lose interest because you're not emotionally invested in the game. You already know what's going to happen. So why bother trying, right? And the third is kind of a general category around complexity. And it's not that there's a right level of complexity. It's more like, is the level of complexity of this game and how much work it is to play, is it proportional to the kind of game that it is, how long it takes? Not all games are for all players, but that is another pitfall of game design. It's like, wow, that's a pretty cool game. If it took half as long, it would have been a great game. Now it's kind of like, I don't know. I have other games that take an hour and a half that I'd rather play, So now that we have these 3 needs as categories, I want to kind of go through some examples of games that do something really well, addressing these areas. So in the area of meaningful decisions, we're going to talk about adding trade-offs to both sides, adding emotional weight, and tuning the randomness to go on the input side rather than the output side. So let's talk about that. So adding trade-offs to both sides means, in order to make decisions more interesting, design a game so that it's not always obvious, oh, I always want to be doing X. If you can create consequences to doing one thing versus another beyond the obvious ones, it can create a lot of interesting tension in a game. This is a game called Arboretum. I actually brought a copy I could show it to you guys afterwards. It's a gorgeous game. You're playing with cards that are numbered, and there's, I think, 10 species of trees. And you're trying to create an arboretum, this kind of like garden path with increasing numbers of a specific species of tree. But without getting into all the complexities of the rules, every time you take a card and you use a card, you have to put a card into a pile that is available to your opponents. And because everyone's trying to have the most powerful garden for each species of tree, That's how you get points. It's terrible when the card is not always good or bad. You have to look at, is this good for me? Or if it's bad for me, how good is it for the other players? Sometimes you just got to hold on to something because if I give it to the other one, the other players, then they're going to crush me. So sort of adding interest and considerations to the other side of a decision can make it more interesting. It's not just which card do I want, it's how bad is it for me not to use this card or to discard this card. Another example is a game called Patchwork, which is a lovely game where the two players, it's a two-player game, have their own board that they're filling up Tetris style with these pieces that are shaped like tetrominoes. And basically, an interesting twist to this game is that the pieces have two different costs. There's a cost in kind of like money, which is represented as buttons, or in this case, as eyeballs. It's like a Halloween version of the game. But also, they have a cost in time because there's a track, and each player only has a certain amount of time to play the game. And that time is not measured in turns. It's measured in every time you place a piece, that piece takes up a certain amount of time. When you get to the end of that track, your game is over. The other player can keep playing. So there are pieces that are really good money-wise, and they're cheap relative to what they're giving you, but they cost a lot of time. So it's adding another dimension to the decisions. Another game, and I love it when games do this. This is such an interesting piece of design. There's a game called Race for the Galaxy. The theme is like you're building these galactic civilizations, but really it's a card game where you're putting out a tableau of cards. You're playing a set of cards, and they interact with each other to get you points. You're building these cards that are planets, and then you get points based on how those cards interact. What's delicious about this game is that you constantly have these hands of cards, but in order to put out a card, you have to spend cards. So if a card costs 4, you need to discard 4 cards to play that card. So you often find yourself with like 10 cards in your hand. You're going, oh, and I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to play that, and then I'm going to play that. But then you go to play an expensive card, and you're like, oh, I have to get rid of 6 cards now. But I already had plans for that one and that one. And then a lot of times later in the game, you're like, oh, and now I'm going to play, oh, I already lost that card. I spent it. So like there's this constant tension of like, do I save this expensive thing for later, or do I burn it now to play a different card that's useful now? Very clever design. So emotional weight is this whole other dimension that can be surprisingly compelling. So there's a game called Agricola. It's one of the all-time classics. And in this game, you are a 17th century farmer, and it's originally a German game. It has the most hilarious subtitle. Agricola, the 17th century, not an easy time for farming. And it really is. Like you've got your little board with your farm, and you can see these little wooden pieces here are your farmers. And like it's a family, and you can have children, and the children are more farmers, and you're putting out pens for your animals. I mean, it's adorable. But one of the requirements of the game is that you feed your family during certain turns. And in order to feed your family, you have to have a certain amount of food. And the larger your family is, the more food you need. If you don't feed your family, no one starves to death. They're not that cruel. But you take begging tokens. And just the mere thought of, oh my God, my family is starving, actually puts some people off from this game. They're like, I can't handle this. Like people are starving. This is not. And then, look at it. It's wooden pieces. It's not exactly, photorealistic. But conceptually, right, you get invested in your family and you don't want your family to starve. Another very interesting game, Spirit Island, kind of flips the script. So there are a lot of board games that are about colonialist expansion and, oh, you're a European power, especially older games. It's like you're a European power and you're colonizing these lands. And, a lot has been said about how it can be problematic depending on the representation of how all this is done. Well, Spirit Island flips the script entirely and says, hey, there's a colonial power arriving at your land, at your island, and you are the native peoples that live in that land, and your goal is to drive off the invaders. And you're doing it through the help of the local deities, the spirits that are supporting you and want the land to remain pure. So essentially, that's the theme of the game, and you care a lot more. And there's some really clever touches, like all of the colonists are represented through these plastic pieces and detailed houses and stuff, and all the native things are represented through these nice warm kind of wooden pieces, and the spirits are very evocative and poetic. And I don't know if I have one in here. River surges in sunlight. So this is a water spirit who basically kills colonists by flooding. So they're all like these poetic kind of concepts. So the theme of the game is amazing. Like it has just this awesome vibe. And as a counterpoint to all these imperialist games, you're just coming in and conquering land, and it's delightful. And you do get much more invested in it. Another one, which is a classic, a very pure game. It's almost more like a psychology experiment than a game. It's called Deep Sea Adventure. And in this, you're all trying to get treasure, and you're diving. The twist is we're all these divers that are diving off a submarine. The twist is we're all sharing one oxygen supply, and the more you swim, the more oxygen you use. So everyone gets greedy and wants to swim to the bottom to get the good stuff. But if you do that, probably unless you can make it back, you're probably all going to die because you're going to run out of oxygen. So it's a very interesting thought experiment. And look at the pieces again. I mean, they're just little squares with little wooden pieces, but the way this game works, it takes 2 or 3 games for anyone to survive, just because everyone always gets greedy. Another one, this is maybe one of the most brutal. In the Year of the Dragon, you're a Chinese prince ruling a province during a very bad time for China, and basically this game, your key people in your province end up dying always. And there's challenges every month. It's 12 months of a year. There's drought, invasions, imperial taxes, diseases, famine, and a firework competition. Throw in something happy. Yeah, this one again, some people find a little intense just conceptually, but it's an interesting game. And finally, Soul Last Days of a Star. If you've ever seen the movie Sunshine, it's kind of a similar concept. So it's like we are, and again, gorgeous game with these abstract geometric shapes and this beautiful painting of the sun. Humanity has perfected this technology that extracts energy from the sun, but the overuse of that technology is destroying the sun, and the sun's going to explode. So the theme of the game is that you are trying to extract one last bit of energy that enables your faction's arc that's going to save your part of humanity to launch them into space and get away from this exploding star. So you're all trying to squeeze the last bit of juice out of the lemon, which blows up the lemon. It's kind of an intense theme, and it kind of gives a poignancy to what is otherwise a very abstract and dry game if you look at it. So those are some examples of emotional weight. Okay, so another strategy is around. So that was the sort of area of making things meaningful. A second category is kind of. Sorry, a last thing is talking about randomness. So randomized decision inputs, not outputs. So this is a very well documented and explained game design principle. So if you randomize things after the player does something, it gives you the feeling of taking risks, which is exciting. I mean, one of the most classic and beloved games is Dungeons and Dragons. And famously, you try to do something, and then you roll a die, and then you see if you succeeded. So you make your plan, and then randomness determines whether or not that plan works. So it's a flavor of game. But too much output randomness in some contexts can make people feel like, I didn't really have enough control over this game. It was just a bad die rolling. So an alternate game design approach is to randomize decision inputs. So make the game random, give it some variety, but the randomness happens before you've made any decisions, and you're reacting to that randomness. You're getting variety, you're getting sort of interesting things happening. So this game, Agricola, that I mentioned earlier about farming, at the start of the game, everyone gets these cards that are skills you can learn, occupations you can take on. And a lot of the game revolves around trying to optimize what you're doing to take advantage of those things. So, for example, maybe one player has a card that allows them to learn to weave baskets. And because of that, when they farm a certain kind of thing, they get bonus food, or they're really good at animal husbandry. So when they, raise a pig, they get 2 pigs, or, there's different kind of bonuses and things. So because that comes into the game at the beginning, you can set a strategy around it and not feel like you're being disrupted all the time by randomness. Another game is called Orléans, where basically you're in Renaissance France and you're getting these various workers. It's kind of charming and themeless at the same time. You're trying to get the most points by, placing your various workers in places to build up knowledge, or there's various things to build up a trading route. A lot of just Renaissance-y things. But what's interesting about this game is similar to in the Year of the Dragon, there's events every round that actually cause you to have certain requirements by the end of the round, or else you get either bonuses or penalties. But those random events are revealed at the beginning of the game. So you can plan for them, and you can know what's going to happen when, and know what those requirements are going to be. So those are kind of some strategies around meaningful decisions. Second category is around sort of the hope of winning. So keep people interested in games by making them feel like they can win and can lose, essentially. And there's a lot of clever mechanics in here. One of the most classic is something people nickname rubber banding, which is to say the farther ahead someone gets, maybe the harder the game gets, or the farther behind someone gets, give them some bonuses, give them some boosts so they can catch up. the classic video game example, this is the blue shell, which in Super Mario Kart, which is a racing game, the person who's ahead, there's a certain weapon that is just a guided missile that always hits the person who's in the front. So that's like the purest example of rubber banding, right? So there's this game called Quacks of Quedlinburg where it's a very fun sort of family game. You're making potions and you have a bag full of these ingredients, and if you pull out too many white ingredients, which are the ones you start with, your potion explodes. So you have to decide how far you want to press your luck, because the more ingredients you have, the more points you're going to get for your potion. In this game, when someone's ahead of you on the score track, there's these little rat tails, there's little rats. And literally what you do is you count how far away your score is from the person who's in front, and that gives you some bonus moves to catch you up. So it's very explicitly just giving a boost to whoever's behind. There's another game called Power Grid, and some people really hate this aspect of Power Grid, where it's a game about building electrical grids. And the way it works is, does something come up on the speaker? No. You essentially every round you're in an auction to bid for the various power plants, but whoever's ahead bids last. So the auction part of this game is very important. And in fact, there's a lot of strategies people do where they try to stay in second place and then come up in the end because it's such an advantage. And this one is one of my favorite examples because it's the fundamental basis of the game. So this is what you call a dexterity game. This game is called Drop Halter. And basically everyone starts with 5 distinct objects in their hand that are different shapes. And each round you flip a card, and the card shows you objects that you need to drop. The idea is that a ghost scares you or whatever, and you have to drop a certain set of objects. And without using your other hand, you have to carefully drop those objects, and whoever drops the right objects first gets to take a bell. And you win the game by having 5 bells. But here's the problem. You're not allowed to drop the bells. So the first time you win, you have 1 little bell in your hand, and they're these little tiny balls. You see them at the top there. The first time you win, you get 1. It's fine. You get 1 little ball in your hand. But by the end, to win, you've got 4 little balls in your hand, and you're trying to drop stuff without dropping any of the bells. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And the minute you drop any bell, you lose all your bells. So it's this like ever increasing mountain that you're climbing. Is brilliant, and it's baked into a dexterity game. So you feel like you're ahead, you feel like you're winning. Like, oh, I almost won. You almost won, but it's also getting almost like exponentially harder as you play. Genius design. Okay, so that's one strategy, is to kind of rubber band and make it harder to go forward as you win. Okay, another strategy is to, as the game progresses, you make the later parts of the game count more. This is a great trick. So in a lot of games, round 1, you're scoring 5 to 10 points per thing. Round 2, you're scoring 10 to 20 points. Round 3, you're scoring 30 to 50 points. So even though you're way behind, you're like, oh, wait, but if I just get those 30 points, I can catch up, because you can score as much in the last round as the first 2 rounds combined. So it's a power curve. A simple example of that is this game, 7 Wonders, which has it's a kind of a card game. Again, you're building a tableau in front of you. It has a civilization theme, and there are ages with more advanced technologies and stuff. And as you go, you're getting more and more points each round. So even if you've fallen behind, you're like, I could still catch up. Another game like that is this thing, Space Base, which basically you're again building a tableau. The theme is kind of wacky. You're trying to launch your ships into space. I don't even remember what the theme's supposed to mean, but it's very fun. It's a mechanical game where once you build up these things, anytime anybody rolls a die, all the things you've built up trigger. So you're like getting points, scoring, and it's almost like a slot machine kind of game. But the fun part about this game is that they build this ridiculous Hail Mary that's almost impossible to use. There's a card that just says you win. And if you play this card, you win. But playing this card is really hard. Like, you have to charge it up, and the way you charge it up is difficult. I don't remember if I've ever won with this, but I can't tell you how many games when I've gotten close, I'm like, I don't care if I lose. I want to try to win with the you win card, because it's just a fun, just to shoot the moon, let's go for this kind of mechanic. It just adds so much flavor. A second strategy for retaining hope in the game, and this is something that was kind of a breath of fresh air from so-called Euro games, is obfuscating the score. So traditional games, you're tracking the score as you go. You have a score track around the ends or whatever. And so every turn you see that so-and-so is ahead of so-and-so by this much, etc. But there are games that either completely obfuscate the score, meaning it's hard to tell who's ahead, or they hide some parts of the score. So you could be surprised at the end. Oh, wait, you had more bonus points than me, so you actually pulled ahead. So here's a game called Hansa Teutonica. You're building up trading routes, and there's different maps, but this one is of Germany. And the mechanics don't matter that much for this example. The main point is that there are certain points you gain as you go by doing things on the map. But then and that triggers the end of the game. So you get to a certain score and that triggers the end of the game. But then there's a bunch of other rules that fire, and those rules often add up to more points than the first part of the game. So it's actually often people are pleasantly surprised. Oh, I wasn't as far behind, or oh, I won. So it keeps things interesting because you don't know up front who's going to win. Same thing with this game Sagrada, where you're laying out dice to form patterns like stained glass. And in this game, most of the scoring is sort of obvious because you have shared objectives. You can see someone's doing better than you, but you also have a secret objective. So you can have one or more secret objectives. And that way, it's like, oh, you were ahead of me, but I had the secret objective and I did really well. So I got more points at the end. And another one like that is called Scoville, where you're farmers raising hot peppers. Delightful game. And it's very dry, but also very fun, where you're basically hopping your farmers around and using them to plant your various peppers. And then the peppers create recipes and you get money for the recipes and on and on. The thing about this game is that you literally have, what do they call that? I'm blanking on the word now. You have a screen in front of you. And whenever you get things that count towards your score, you put them behind the screen. So yes, someone who's got like a super poker brain can, still tally up the points, but most people are not really going to keep track of what your points were. That's deliberate, because otherwise you start mathing it out and now it becomes this kind of very mechanical thing and emotionally just becomes uninteresting if you're behind. Okay, so those are some examples of ways to keep the tension of hope, either mechanically hope of winning or just emotionally like not realizing how badly you've lost or how far you're winning. Okay, so the last part is more of an umbrella about managing complexity. This game's too long, it's too hard for its length or its level of interest, et cetera. So what are some ways to manage complexity to keep games engaging? So one of the ways is to take the rules and encode them into the physical components of the game. So a person doesn't have to mentally compute things. It just happens naturally as you manipulate the components of the game. So I mentioned this game Eclipse before, one of my favorites. And essentially, Eclipse has a pretty complicated economy, which is one of the interesting twists of the game. So you're building the space empire. Most games say, okay, you have X number of actions and you have to stop. In Eclipse, you can take literally as many actions as you want on your turn. However, of course, your space empire, you have colonies, you have planets, you're mining resources, usual sci-fi kind of stuff. At the end of your turn, you need to pay a bill. Call it taxes, call it upkeep. And the more turns you take, the more you owe at the end. Calculating that is a drag. Keeping track of things is a drag. And you'll see here, there's all kinds of neat little things in the board. So here's how the economy of Eclipse is tracked. You start your turn with a bunch of disks laid on top of a track that has numbers on it. Every time you take an action, you end up leaving a disk somewhere on the board. You leave it on the colony. There's various places you put them. And as you do that, it inherently tracks how many turns you took. And your upkeep cost at the end of the game is merely the number that you last uncovered. So the first 2 moves are free. Then you're going to owe 1 thing, then 2, then 3, then 5, etc. And they take the further step of making these disks clear, so you can kind of like math out like, oh man, I can't afford 7 resources, or I can afford 7 but not 10. And here's what happens. If you get to the end of your turn and the income and the stuff that you produce doesn't pay for what your actions, you have to start liquidating parts of your empire and selling off the bits that you just built. And it's not a good price. So it's bad for you to kind of overspend. But brilliant. And it adds this economic factor without adding any math, really. Because similarly, your income is also tracked. As you remove the things that allow your colonies to produce science or industry or whatever, it reveals the number of how much of that thing you're going to gain at the end of the turn. You never have to sit there counting things on the board. It's all just there on your player board. This other game, which I brought, I can show you guys later, it's called Smartphone Inc. And the theme is wild. It's your smartphone manufacturers trying to beat your rival smartphone manufacturers. and you're creating networks in different markets and you're selling your phones and you're adding features to them. You can make cheap low-end phones and try to flood like cheap, like less rich markets. You can make higher end phones and try to sell into the richer markets. This game is a sleeper. It's plays much easier than it sounds because it's incredibly well designed. And one of the things they do is you can see here at the top, you've got these I don't know if you can see my mouse. You've got these icons. There's actually an eight step game loop. And I'm not even going to remember what these things are now. You get your money income, you make your goods, you transport your phones, but there's very clear icons, and each step is very simple and very mechanical. And all you're doing is, okay, we're on the red step, move this to here. You're on the green step. But in total, it gives you the feeling that you're actually making meaningful decisions as a smartphone manufacturer. And it's not nearly as mathy as it seems. And to give you an idea of how much the designers of this game didn't want you to have to think too hard and too mechanically and just enjoy the vibe of the decisions. On the inside of the screen, you have a screen because you're hiding certain things you're planning for next turn. They actually included a multiplication table for multiplying the number of phones you're producing times the cost of the phones. So you don't even have to do that math. It's just written on the thing. Okay. So that's one strategy, is just kind of make the components do the math for you. A second one is to managing the teaching of the game. So there's certain parts of certain games which otherwise play smoothly that are just hard to get until you've played through it once and seen how it works. It's hard to understand. And certain rules are really hard to like absorb just by hearing someone explain them. You got to see it. So an example of that, there's this game called Concordia, very well designed. And basically the theme is, again, you're going out on a map to create trading routes, and you're putting your trading things in various places, which allows you to create wine and create various things. And the way the game works is that you have these cards in your hand that are all the actions you can do. So, oh, this action lets me move a colonist and build a colony somewhere. This action lets me produce all the goods that I'm making, etc. The twist in this game, okay, you're building up this board and you're getting all these resources. The twist of the game is that at the bottom of each of these cards, I don't know if you can see this little bar here, are the names of Roman gods. So this is kind of a Roman themed game. So there's like Venus, Saturn, etc. Well, each of these names of gods is actually a scoring condition. So at the end of the game, these cards you've used to perform actions, which you can buy more of as the game goes, they become the points. So like one card says, hey, get a point for every city you built. Another card says, get a point for the number of distinct places on the board that you've done something, or the amount of wine you have, or whatever. So the game is kind of multiplying these card rules times what you ended up doing. It's actually quite unintuitive until you see it pan out. And then all of a sudden, a person who knows the game crushes everybody else, because it's like, well, they really leaned what they were doing in a direction, and then they went ahead and bought those cards that were going to allow them to do that. So what the game cleverly does, and some games do, is they say, listen, the scoring at the end is unintuitive. So early in the game, especially if it's maybe optional in some games, early in the game, run a scoring round. Just run the rules that get run at the end. Run them like a couple of turns in, so people understand the nature of the decisions they're making. Because you can't really teach it up front. You don't want to get all the way to the end and have someone go, oh man, if I knew that, I would have played totally differently. So you kind of insert a learning moment in the middle and say, you know what, let's explain these rules in depth once we're actually doing it, because when you see it, you'll understand it. Another game, and I won't go into the details here because I know I'm running lower on time, is Isle of Cats. Great theme. So the theme of this game is you're trying to rescue these cats off an island before an evil pirate comes and kills all the cats. And at its heart, it's another tile laying Tetris game. You've got your boat, you've got the cats. The cats are the shape of tetrominoes. But around that game, there are rules for scoring extra points. For example, having cats of the same color next to each other, and there's these mice that you're covering up and all this stuff. And on top of that, there's some common scoring that everybody does, but then there's these cards that get you special scoring at the end. And you need to use, you're gaining fish, and you use the fish to attract a cat to your boat, so you can place it on your boat. You're also using fish to buy the cards that get you the points. So there's like these other considerations. Well, Isle of Cats is meant to be a scalable game that can be enjoyed by families as well and easy to teach. So there's a family mode where they just cut 2/3 of the stuff. They're like, you know what? Even if all you're doing is just taking the cats and laying out the tiles, just those basic core rules are still fun. So there's a family mode, and they're like, look, you can start with family mode, and you may not even ever bother with the other mode. So it's a wonderful thing to say, look, there's an easy mode and a hard mode. And in this case, like radically different mechanics. Like there's entire levels of the game that are just cut out. Another tactic for managing complexity is to narrow the choices on any given turn to a manageable subset. So say, for example, well, here's a game called Gloomhaven, which basically is modeled after RPG video games. So, these are games where you have a set of dungeon, a party of people that are exploring a dungeon, and each of them has special powers and their character class, the fighter, the wizard, the usual sort of Dungeons and Dragons style setup. Gloomhaven is a rather elaborate board game rendition of this. It comes with 101 dungeons. There are 17 character classes. The box is 22 pounds with, 101 scenarios, map tiles. It's like RPG. It's like a role-playing game in a box. So you can imagine that there's a lot of different things you can do. You can move, you can do various powers. There's all these modifiers. I'm poisoned. I have this special ability. I have these spells, those weapons. The way they make it a manageable game to play is that, again, the actual actions are cards that are in your hand, and each person has a unique deck of cards specific to the type of character they are and specific to their level of experience and the things that they've gotten. And basically, on your turn, you're looking at that hand of cards, and each card, there is a little subdivision in there. Each card can be used one of two ways. So you see here, for example, this card is a flamethrower, which can give you a ranged attack, or you can use that as a shield. And all these cards have numbers on them. These are initiatives, so you can decide, well, if I do this, then I'm going to go early in the turn, which may have some benefits. If I do this, I'll go later in the turn, which has other benefits. And so at any given time, you're only looking at a handful of cards that determine what you might do. You're also looking at where you're on the board and where's the other person in your party and you're cooperating and where's the monsters and how are they going to move. But this really narrows things down. And in fact, you start each scenario with a full deck and a full hand of cards. And as you burn through the cards, you become tired and then you have to rest. When you rest, you get the cards back in your hand, but you lose a card. So you're getting more and more tired. So there's considerations around managing kind of your resources and burning through your cards. Another example of this is a game called Arcs, which the theme is, again, like a space. You're conquering planets and fighting other players. It's a very aggressive game. You're always fighting and stealing from other people. And in this game, there are 10 different actions that you can do. But again, the how you do your actions is you got a hand of very traditional looking, almost like playing cards. And each type of action there's 4 suits, 4 colors of cards, and each type of action only lives on one of the 4 suits. So there might be an exception to that. But basically, in order to do a certain kind of action, you need that color of card and you need to play it. And the act of playing it is this little mini game that's almost like a traditional card game, almost like trick-taking games, where one person leads with a suit and then you can follow the suit, or you can beat their number. And so it has some traditional card gaming mechanics. So you have this little card playing mini game on top of this sprawling game about factions and powers and planets and combat and stealing and all this stuff. So it, again, narrows your choices on a given turn to what you can do. So you don't have to run through like, a million things. So I'm going to stay talking about arcs. So that was one set of strategies for managing complexity. Another strategy is a lot of times, games run too long, especially complicated games. And an interesting strategy or set of strategies is, a lot of games are slow in the beginning, or they really drag out in the end. Like, it's a great game, but man, it was 2.5 hours. If it was 2 hours or maybe an hour and 45 minutes, then it'd be fun. Then it would be like match the level of interest I had in the game. So there's some really clever ways that people cut out the slow early turns or the dragging out late turns. So arcs, one very clever thing they do is a lot of times in these space games like an Eclipse, you start out in this empty galaxy and you're all slowly making your way to each other, and then you're going to run into each other and it's going to be crowded, it's going to be a traffic jam. In arcs, why bother with that boring stuff? Everybody starts out on the map in each other's face, already has planets. There's deliberately parts of the map that are left empty, so you can compete for things, but it throws you right in the mix. It skips those early 3 or 4 turns. And there's still some land to grab. There's still some planets to grab, but you've got that. And the way they do it is they have these setup cards, and there's a whole variety of them so that they can put a bunch of them in the box. And it determines kind of which players start where. So turn 1, you're already potentially fighting. And you're worrying about these players and who's at your doorstep and who's crowding you out. Another game that does something interesting like this is, and a sub-strategy, is to end the game when a winner or loser is obvious. So we talked earlier about Risk and Monopoly and how like the end gets really dragged out. So here's a game called Clank, And it also has a dungeon theme, but it's very simplified. This is a nice kind of fun family game. The theme of Clank is that you're a bunch of adventurers stealing treasure inside a mountain that belongs to a dragon. And it's called Clank because the dragon's increasingly getting angry. He's getting pissed off. And anytime you do certain things, it makes a noise. And then depending on how much you've stolen from the dragon and how late in the game it is, the dragon, you're pulling these tokens from the thing. And if the dragon hears you, it attacks you and you get damaged and it hurts you. So the thing about this game is it's a race to see who can get in, get the treasure, and get out. And there's no timer on the game until one person makes it out. Once one person makes it out, there might be people right behind them. So you don't want to just stop the game. But essentially now the damage that you get from the dragon and the frequency of getting damage and all that just goes up. So the game's going to end pretty quickly. It goes into kind of like a sudden death mode. So it's clever because at that point, someone's already the leader. They're already ahead. And it also emphasizes the speed aspect. Well, if I can get in and out way before everyone else and they get too greedy, so it adds some interesting dynamics. Another approach to doing it, honestly, cutting out the boring early and late turns and controlling game length is just fix the length of the game. So this is a game called The White Castle, gorgeously rendered game. The theme is Japan Himeji. I actually have not done the research on the historical period around this, but it's very pretty. And basically, there are only 3 rounds in this game. And each round, you only get to play 3 turns. And each turn, you're taking a die and placing it. What makes the game richer, and it's not a 5-minute game, it's about a 60-minute game, is that as you become more powerful and you have more things on the board, there are combo effects, and putting one die triggers this, and with that I do this, and with that I do this. But still, there are only 3 rounds. So these dice get reset 3 times. So you have a total of 9 turns in the whole game. So that kind of like fixes it. Agricola, there's a certain number of spaces on the board, and there are 14 rounds, and that's it. It doesn't get, it's like whoever's got the most points at the end, where the end is 14 rounds. Another way to kind of cut out boring sort of late game situations is just to end the game, have a concession rule. So there's a wonderful game called Quartermaster General, themed around World War II, where you've got 2 teams of players. And it's a surprisingly compelling game. I'm not super into these historical war themed games, but this one is you have these cards that give you actions, but each player has cards specific to their. So if I'm Italy or I'm Russia or I'm Germany, I have specific actions, and the way my cards interact with my teammates and with my opponent's cards and the map gives you very historical interactions while allowing you to kind of do something new. But the 2 teams, the game normally runs 20 rounds to simulate a historical time frame. But if one team gets 30 points ahead of the other team, the game just ends. So you don't need to run the clock. It's like, all right, we know they're going to win. Just end the game. Similarly, there's a game called Shikoku 1889. This is one of a very large family of so-called train games, 18XX games that are set in the 1800s where you're managing railroad companies. They're very sophisticated games with stocks and money and all kinds of stuff. And in this game, the game ends when one person goes bankrupt. Like, look, someone's already lost. We're clearly late in the game, or we're not, and that person's going to be bored. So let's just end the game now. I think it's a really nice kind of concept. So these are some ideas from well-designed games that address kind of areas of engagement, make my decisions meaningful, make me care about making decisions, give me a hope of winning or a possibility of losing, and try to tune the game so it's not too complicated, too hard to learn, too long, etc., for what it is. So really quickly, I just want to speed run on some meta strategies and takeaways, some of which come directly out of this and some of which are, again, just kind of coming out of my experiences with board games. As a designer, you're probably trying to hit a certain, and that was the diagram I was going to draw earlier, a certain budget for time and complexity. In other words, you may be designing a more complicated, and this is true for experiences in general, you may be designing a more complicated, more drawn out experience, and the payoff is there because of the results of that experience. Or you may be doing something quicker and lighter where people are not that invested. You have to know where the thing you're designing sits, and you have to tune accordingly. You can't have it be sort of simpler, lighter in importance or weight, but then take too long or be too hard to learn, etc. So you have to kind of know where you fit on that continuum, and you have to tune accordingly. A second thing is to make experiences resilient to a variety of participants. So especially in board gaming, where you have people that are trying to have a good time with each other, but some people know games better than others. Some people have more skill than others, etc. Make a game resilient so it's not too easy for advanced players to crush the less experienced players, or at least when people get ahead, it doesn't just crush the dreams of the inexperienced players. So try to keep it interesting for everybody longer. And appreciate that people have different learning speeds and different experience levels. A third thing is kind of around the emotionality of an experience. So consider your narrative arc and your level of emotional interest. So for games, you want to keep the hope of winning throughout. You can imagine something like interactive fiction or whatnot. You can use loss aversion to raise stakes. So it's like, you know what? If I made thematic elements that made me care a little bit more about the outcome here, that's another way to kind of create interest. And especially pay attention to the middle and end game as far as maintaining interest. And sometimes hiding or leaving out information makes an experience better. Maybe it's possible to know too much. One of the interesting things that happens with board games now is that a lot of games have digital adaptations that give you all kinds of things, including sometimes calculating the score as the game runs, when in real life it's hard to calculate the score. And there are games that people are like, nope, I turn off the score tracking because it ruins the game for me. Like, not knowing the score is an important part of this. Another sort of meta strategy is to explicitly consider the learning and onboarding and the design of the experience. So can you get someone from the teaching and the learning, the abstract learning mode, to doing faster? So not just being in like reading instructions or hearing the teaching. I know from personal experience, trying to get people to play games in my family or otherwise, a lot of people who enjoy playing games hate learning games. So how do you shorten the learning experience as much as possible? Not just in the design of the game, but in what needs to be taught when. How do you make the game have its own built-in sort of tutorials? Can you stage some of the learning to happen during the game so they don't have to try to learn it up front? Can you provide a simpler, shorter version that lets someone get perspective and have fun faster, and then they can play the more advanced version? And finally, almost finally, is to manage the complexity of participating in the game. So try to limit the size of decisions at each step. Do you really need to give someone so many options, or can you try to narrow to a certain set of options that remain interesting? When people are deciding and playing something or doing something, minimize the dynamic information they're tracking. Make it sort of built in. Make it so they don't have to manually look at things or calculate things, or make it intuitive that when A changes, B changes, and you can just look at it. You don't have to think about it. Provide ambient information sort of in the background that gives people a sense of something without them having to think about numbers and things like that. And that's what I've got. So thank you guys for coming. Hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully there's some interesting takeaways that might apply to other areas. And at the very least, and my greatest hope is that you heard about one or more games today that you've never heard of before that you want to check out. I'm more than happy to show you the ones I brought, or talk about other ones that piqued your interest, because there's some spectacular games out there that are really well designed. So thank you so much.